Hey there guys, welcome back. Hope you enjoyed that last video. I know it was a bit of a doozy. I've got a lot of cleaning and painting to do before all those engine parts show up. But the focus of this video is going to be on all that little stuff that has to get done but probably doesn't really deserve its own topic. So it's going to be a whole menagerie of little things today. First up, I have this LED headlight from Cognito Moto. It's a really nice piece, CNC billet housing and everything. So obviously, first thing that I'm going to do is drill a big hole in it. Now the reason why I want to do that is this. This is the ignition key. And normally on an airhead BMW, that goes right in here on the headlight ear on the left-hand side. Obviously the Cognito piece is not built with that in mind, so I have to modify it, and we'll see if there's enough room. I'm going to start by measuring to see if there's even enough room to fit that key switch inside the headlight. I'm really hoping that that's the case because I'd like to keep the key there. It's one of those charming BMW things that I find really endearing about these old bikes. You can see that I don't have as much depth as I was hoping for. I'm going to have to do something with this lock in order to fit it in there. I'm thinking that I can trim down these tabs on the back where the wiring would normally connect and perhaps hardwire them together so that it takes up less room. So we're going to need a 7/8 diameter hole in order to fit the lock. However, there's a little tab on either side, and if you look at the stock headlight, you'll see that there's a matching little indent on either side of the hole as well. I gave the headlight shell a nice protective sheath of painter's tape. Then I marked off which side I wanted the hole to be on, kind of like at the ER. You know, you don't want to accidentally cut off the wrong leg after all. So something important here is that I'm going to cut a 3/4 inch hole rather than the 7/8 that you saw before, because then I'm going to go back in and file it out to keep those little indentations in place. So holding onto the part for drilling kind of presented a challenge because of its weird shape, but eventually I figured it out. I'm using 2-stroke oil as lubricant today, which is a nice blue color. With my hole drilled out, I've stuck the headlight in the vise using that same bolt so I'm not clamping to the shell itself. You can see I've already gone ahead and marked out some lines to file the tube. This needs a little final finishing work, but hey, look, the lock actually fits into place. So I'm going to take this and pop the headlight back in and see if I ruined a very expensive part or not. Okay, well, I have the lock cylinder inside the headlight shell. Worked out pretty good. Doesn't want to rotate or anything, so it'll function fine for turning the key. So let's see how badly this fouls on the headlight. Okay, not too bad. About 3/16 of an inch or so, which is good news. So that 3/16 of an inch isn't really a huge deal because, as you can see, these are almost a 1/2 inch tall. So I should be able to, snip them right where this hole is and come up with an alternative way of soldering the wires into place. And I think that'll work. I'm going to be using a thing called a Motogadget M-unit. It's kind of like a, accessories computer kind of programmable thing that you can fit on these bikes that gives you an ability to like program return signals. It has like a Bluetooth ignition and everything. It's a pretty cool little piece. And for the key switch on that guy, you only need 2 poles. So from constant 12 volt to switched 12 volt is essentially what that's about. And that just lets the M-unit know that the bike is now on, rather than the original one, which had, I think, 4 wires going to it. That way it powered the headlight relay and a bunch of other stuff that the M-unit takes care of. So what that means is I can get rid of all but 2 of the posts on this switch. So I'll start by cutting them all in half, but it might come to me needing to remove some of them entirely, which is okay. With the lock tabs cut down, now I'm going to try and fit this back together again. I'm going to have to make sure that none of the posts on the key switch are contacting the metal reflector housing on the LED light, but otherwise I think that this one's done. So next project. Thought I'd stick the headlight on the bike real quick while I have the triple trees together. You can see I'm a little far forward here. That's because the lip here is contacting the shell of the headlight. The OEM BMW one's a little bit different. You can see the same deal kind of over here. Additionally, are kind of kicked in like that, just because the BMW headlight is a little wider overall, even though it's the same size lens. So that's going to require a little thinking. And I'll move on to something else while I think about that. Next up, mount for this M-unit. So this is the control box thing that I was telling you guys about. I'm going to put it on the frame of the bike, and I have to decide where. So I'm going to have this live under the tank, and it's going to go right here where the starter relay used to go. This guy serves a lot of different functions, one of which is replacing a starter relay. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to ditch the OEM one. This is going to live in its place. And you can see pretty close to the right size, so I'm just going to extend this little bit out, weld a piece of metal into place or something like that. All right, made a little cardboard piece that is going to fit there pretty nicely. It's sized about this piece of 3/4 flat stock that you may remember from a previous episode using this as a specialized tool to take apart the BMW forks. You can tell it's a little twisted. All right, that didn't take very long. Just a tiny little piece of metal there. I've marked in silver Sharpie where I'm going to be removing paint to do some welding. So I'm going to go ahead and get that done and then tack it in. I start by welding a nut to the back side of my part. Well, you can see I kind of screwed up here. A little bit of weld penetrating the edge of that nut. That's why I like using the flange pieces, because not only is the nut and my part no longer usable, so is the bolt. So I'm going to throw these in the garbage and go home and get some dinner and start again tomorrow. All right, it's a new day. Had to work on a couple other projects, but I'm back into this M-unit mount. You can see I added this little triangle of metal down here on the right. The idea being that I'd bolt in on one side and then drill and tap for the second hole here. But you know what? There's a bit of a gap behind it, and I don't like it. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut that whole bracket off and make something from scratch, which is frankly what I should have done in the first place. I don't know if you guys remember from the taillight video when I was telling you, like, you don't think something came out well, just throw it away and start over. This is one of those times. So I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this, but after some test fitting, let's see if I can get some light in there. You can see there's the Motogadget M-unit kind of mounted up, just held in place by a couple magnets here. But you can see there's just a hint of space between the tank and the wiring. So it's taken a good bit of fit up to get that situated where I want it. But after a couple mounts and tack welds and finding out that the tank was making contact with the piece, like, I've finally got it trimmed up to where I'm happy with where it's sitting. So I'm gonna go ahead and actually weld it in for real. It's one of those things, it's like just a simple little bracket with two bends, but you know, if you wanted to get it perfect, it takes a while to do it. All right, I got the piece of metal tacked in, hopefully for the last time, and I just put the Motogadget M-unit in place to see how it fits under the tank now that it's tacked in. If everything looks good, I'll finish weld it. Well, there is still clearance, so looks like it didn't move too much from my last test fit. That'll do. A little later in the day, you can see I've torn the bike down quite a bit, removed the swing arm and a bunch of other stuff. And that is because I'm going to start to fit this subframe. So I have that in place and double checking that it is sitting parallel with the frame itself, which it is. And I use this piece of string to guide. So you can see it's not really lining up there. So this is going to have to come a little bit to the right before that gets tacked into place. To admit it, but I made a mistake. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it in the camera here, but look crooked. If you look at where the taillight housings are, and kind of Oh, doesn't really match up there. What happened was I was using my digital level and digital angle finder to try to get that to line up properly with the frame, trying to get things done quickly rather than going to 0. I just matched, the 0.4 degree angle that the frame was at, not realizing that the direction the arrows pointed in on the two different gauges were different. So even though they were both pointing this way, one meant the other way around. So rather than having them both be 0.4 degrees tilted this way, one went that way, the other went that way. So we were at 0.8 degree, which is noticeable. It's kind of a shame. I did a pretty decent job welding that. Fortunately, I'm not entirely finished, and I'm glad that I decided to take the time to look at it before I completed it totally. So I guess I'm gonna get in there with a grinder or a Dremel and try to cut that out and see if I can't rotate it again. But that's the nature of the kind of work this is. Sometimes you have to do things twice. I think that's the running theme of this video. Whew. All right, it's pretty late. Let's see, it's nice and dark outside. I didn't bother to record the whole welding that in for a second time thing. I figure, once is enough for you guys. It's pretty much all the way there, all welded up. One nice thing about that whole debacle is I was able to tear open the tubing and confirm that I'm getting full weld penetration. So that's something, I guess. It's a new day, same old stuff. Got a lot to do. This shop is a complete disaster. As you can see, boxes of parts everywhere, just tools, everything. I like to work in a nice, clean, calm environment, so this is driving me a little nuts. So, after I finish a couple things today, I'll probably go through the shop and clean up a bit. As you just saw last night, I finished up a really big part of the project, which was finally welding the subframe in. Took me a couple tries, but got it done. My welds aren't as nice looking the second time around, but the thing is on nice and straight. As you can see there. And I'm getting some good spaceship vibes off of this, which is good considering the name of the shop. Also burned in our battery box holder thing. I've got to flip the whole thing over and weld the other side of it, as well as getting this little plug weld for the subframe, and one or two things left on these shock mounts, just filling in little gaps and stuff. So gonna get that done. Got to disassemble the swing arm, take the final drive off, take the drive shaft out. That's gonna get powder coated the same color as the rest of the frame. Got to determine if there's anything else I want done. In fact, later today, I'll probably pull out this little CB125 that has been tucked in the corner all winter. It's got this cool little stainless exhaust I made for it. I'm actually going to modify that exhaust a little bit so that it isn't quite, as high. Make it a little more user-friendly. But that's going to get some of the same powder coat colors, so it makes sense to break that thing down and get that sent out at the same time. I got a lot to do, so I'm going to stop talking. One other thing I want to do is add another connection point for the battery box, because while this is solid, it does have a bit of a lever action because of how far this sticks up. So I think I'm going to do something similar to this little side stand stop. Probably cut this off and then have like a little piece that comes out and connects over here. let me show you what I came up with. Essentially, two little angle brackets. They're going to go together like that, slide into place like this. That'll weld into the side of the battery box. That'll weld onto my kickstand mount, and then I'll drill a hole in between the two and bolt them together. I'll end up keeping this. I thought it might cut it off because we're not going to use a side stand on this bike, but I'll leave them there just in case, you know, somewhere down the line they decide they want one. Holes drilled. Here's my battery box, all ready to go. Last thing to do really is just get rid of this ugly bracket. This is what used to hold up the original battery, which you can see is this honker right here. Well, one more thing, I gotta knock the old head bearing races out of the frame. Last time I did a BMW, I did not do that. I left the head bearing races in there because I thought, you know, it makes it a little easier. You don't have to worry about getting powder in that area, and then you just knock them out afterwards. Except the bottom one was super frozen, and so we had to do a couple of interesting little things involving a Dremel to cut it, and tried using a torch to heat it up, which kind of messed with the powder coat, as you might imagine. So I'm going to be smart this time. I'm going to take those races out. So I'm going to fill this hole left from where the steering lock was, and I'm going to do that just by taking this little piece is left over from the steering lock. It was what would go in here to prevent the thing from moving. I'm just going to shove it in here. I'm just going to fill it with weld. No need to make it complicated. We'll probably come back in with the Dremel and clean that up a little bit, make it a little tidier. You guys really didn't think I was going to leave it looking like that, right? I was staring at it for a minute, and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do it. Take it all the way down to the middle. Needs a little bit of cleanup, but it looks a hell of a lot better than it did before with that big ugly lump thing. Do it right because you do it twice. With that, I think my frame is just about ready to go to powder coat, including that battery box. I do quite like how that turned out. I'm going to leave the steering stabilizer bracket and the horn bracket because they might be useful. Same reason that I left the kickstand brackets there, just in case somebody in the future decides they want to use something like that. Alright guys, it's a couple days later after you watched all that stuff that you just saw. And I'm ready to drop everything off for powder coat. You can see I've got all the parts separated by the different finishes that I'm looking for. I've got the frame here. Now the reason why it's a couple days later is because you'll notice there's not one but two bike frames. This is a project that I've had in the shop for several years, and finally putting the finishing touches on it. So it's going to get powder coated, painted, reassembled alongside the BMW. So yeah, I'm going to drop this off as soon as I can. And I did hear that BMW finally shipped my engine parts. Well, some of them. So I can get started on that side of things. So hope you stick around for the next one, and I'll see you guys later.